I think I'd like to start by saying a few words about how I get into this whole debate. Been close, partly living in South Africa for 25 years, but working with the trade unions. So my entry point into the South African debate, and also this debate around the ANC, is actually from, more than anything, from the COSATU side, the South African trade union movement. Now, we talk about an ANC as if it's one thing, one unit, one party, one organization. The ANC is many things. Point number one, I think it's important we take with us in this debate that the ANC represents many forces and many political views. It's a broad alliance in itself. That's important. It comes from the right to the left. And there's a lot of debates inside the ANC and inside the alliance. But I'd like to add another thing. The ANC is also more than a party. And I think we need to understand that, especially with lots of Norwegians sitting in the room. It's not simply a political party. It's a liberator. For many people in South Africa, it is a family. It was the movement that liberated them from apartheid. So you will find, for example, when people answer surveys, the latest that I saw now recently, COSATU members giving views on politics in South Africa, who should be the next president, their views on development in South Africa, etc. They give very clear expressions of never wanting to mobilize against the ANC. But they are far more willing to mobilize on cases, on issues. And I think we need to keep that in mind. The ANC is an ID, it's the family, it's the liberator, it's the broad movement that changed their lives in so many ways, although there are still huge steps to go forward, in addition to being a political party. Now, I'd like to take one step back as well, to '94, in order to try and sort of draw up just a few elements that I think are important to understand what the situation we have today. One was, of course, the legacy of apartheid, which was massive, institutions, organizations, the economy, massive inequalities, discrimination, etc., etc. You know a lot of that. We know a lot about that, the legacy. So that did take time in itself to repair. It had to. That was the one thing I think we need to take with us. Linked to that was also a massive concentration of economic power, which is part and parcel of the explanation for why it has been so incredibly difficult to create jobs, add to the fact that there were massive differences in education. So you were going to build, one was going to build a new economy, a new country, with very limited capacity in the first place because of apartheid, and with huge concentration of economic power in very, very few hands. We need to keep that in mind. We need to also keep in mind that the ANC that came into power, was elected into power, and has been re-elected ever since, was a very broad movement, not only of political forces and ideas, but also people coming in from exile, people coming out from prison, and people representing the internal mass democratic movement. And to merge all those was not particularly easy. And I think, without talking only about the ANC, I think a lot of previous liberation movements around have struggled with exactly the same transition into a political party. The SPLM in South Sudan experiences the same problems today. We've got other liberation movements in Southern Africa that have gone through the same problems. That is a massively demanding process. I'd like to add one more thing. Richard said something about the ANC not appealing for mobilization from civil society. I think civil society has a responsibility on its own for in the early 90s, including Kosato actually, to basically hand over power. I mean, we have to keep in mind that the ANC was outside the country, inside, but there was also a massive civil society movement, the UDF, the trade union movement, which was spearheading the change from inside. I remember I did surveys in the very early 90s, mapping how many organizations and activities and schemes, arenas people took part in. You had a situation with the average of South Africans, black South Africans in the early 90s being members, so to speak, of 3.4, if I remember correct, at least more than 3 organizations. They were members of unions, they were members of civics, they took part in the church, they were incredibly active. So now what happened in the early 90s? The ANC took power, and civil society suddenly did not necessarily know how to then behave, to put it bluntly and easily. And I think this is part and parcel of explaining the situation we have today. We have a party elected by the majority, with a population who will disagree on many issues, and a civil society which starts mobilizing again. And I think you can talk to a lot of the old civil society leaders, union leaders that I know best. They will say that they did a massive mistake in the early 90s. Why? Because they undervalued the fact that good democracies are actually built on mobilization by the people and civil society organizations and strong mass movements. And I think that would have been good for the ANC as well, to have a strong civil society organizations, because it's not good for any party. We've had similar discussions here in Norway and in other countries in Europe. It's not good for any party to sit with power over decades without having a proper competition and challenge either from an opposition or from civil society. So what I see today, yes, there are bad signs, and there are definitely problems in South Africa, but we should also take with us that there are positive signs. I am one of those who believe that the Constitutional Court verdict is a good sign. There is a court system that actually corrects the mistakes done by politicians. There is now a mobilization wave, and we see here a representative of one such good organization. And that to me is a very, very good sign that there is a better future in South Africa. Thanks.